The auction block stood in the center of Kennewick, Washington Territory, under a merciless August sun in 1882, and the girl with eyes like storm clouds stood silent as men bid on her future. Abigail Ellis had learned long ago that silence was safer than trying to explain what her tongue could not form. The words lived inside her mind, complete sentences with proper grammar and feeling, but they died somewhere between thought and speech. Not a single sound had ever escaped her lips, and for this failing, her stepfather had decided she was worthless, a burden, property to be sold to the highest bidder for whatever labor they saw fit. $20, called a man with tobacco-stained teeth. 25, countered another, eyeing her like livestock. Isaac Brennan sat astride his horse at the edge of the crowd, his jaw tight with disgust. He had come to town for supplies, not to witness this mockery of human decency. The girl could not have been more than 18 or 19, dressed in a faded calico dress that had been mended too many times. Her dark hair hung in a braid down her back, and despite the humiliation of her position, she held her chin level, refusing to cower. "She is mute but strong," the auctioneer announced, a portly man with a voice that carried across the square. "Can work a full day without complaint, perfect for household labor or field work, clean, healthy, and obedient." Isaac felt his stomach turn. The year was 1882, for God's sake. Slavery had been abolished for 17 years. Yet here stood this girl being sold like chattel under some twisted loophole of indentured servitude. He had heard of such things, desperate families selling off children they could not afford to feed, but witnessing it was another matter entirely. $30, someone shouted. Isaac found himself dismounting before he made a conscious decision to do so. His boots hit the dusty street, and he pushed through the crowd of onlookers. Most were there for the spectacle rather than the bidding, he realized. Entertainment in a town where entertainment was scarce. $50, Isaac heard himself say, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. Heads turned. The auctioneer's eyes lit with greed. $50 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 55? The previous bidders looked at Isaac, taking in his dusty trail clothes, the well-worn colt at his hip, and the set of his shoulders that suggested he was not a man to cross. One by one they fell silent. 50 going once, going twice, sold to the cowboy for $50. Isaac pulled the money from his pocket, grateful that he had just been paid for delivering a herd to the rail station. The auctioneer counted the bills with practiced fingers while someone pushed Abigail forward. She stumbled slightly but caught herself, her eyes meeting Isaac's for the first time. He saw fear there, which cut him deeper than he expected. Also wariness, resignation, and something else he could not quite name. Intelligence, perhaps. A sharp awareness that spoke of a mind fully engaged behind the silence. "She is all yours," the auctioneer said, handing Isaac a piece of paper. "This here is the contract. She is bound to you for 5 years or until you choose to release her. She runs off, the law brings her back." Isaac took the paper without looking at it, his attention on the girl. Up close, he could see the slight tremor in her hands, the only outward sign of her fear. Her face remained carefully blank. "Come on," he said quietly, trying to gentle his voice. "Let's get out of here." She followed without argument, walking 3 steps behind him as he led his horse toward the general store. Isaac could feel the weight of curious stares, hear the whispers that followed them. He ignored them all, focused on getting through his supply list and getting back to his ranch. The ranch was a half-day's ride from town, a modest spread of 300 acres where he ran cattle and broke horses. He had built the house himself over the past 2 years, a simple but solid structure with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a main room. He lived alone, preferring the company of his animals to most people he had met in the territory. Now he had a girl who could not speak, purchased on impulse, and he had no idea what to do with her. Inside the general store, he gathered flour, salt, coffee, and the other necessities he needed. Abigail stood near the door, hands folded in front of her, eyes downcast. The shopkeeper, a woman named Mrs. Patterson, gave her a sympathetic look but said nothing. Everyone knew what had transpired outside. "She will need some things too," Isaac said, realizing he had not thought this through. "Fabric for dresses, whatever women need." Mrs. Patterson nodded and approached Abigail gently. "Come here, dear. Let's see what we can find for you." Abigail looked at Isaac, seeking permission. He nodded, and she followed Mrs. Patterson to the back of the store where bolts of fabric lined the shelves. Isaac paid for everything, watching his carefully saved money disappear but unable to feel bad about it. The girl had nothing. She needed basic necessities, and it would be cruel to take her to a ranch in the middle of nowhere without proper clothing or supplies. The ride back was silent except for the sound of hooves on hard, packed earth and the creak of the saddle. Isaac rode his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, while Abigail sat behind him, perched on the bedroll with the supplies. She held onto his waist lightly, as if afraid to grip too tight, and he could feel how stiffly she sat. "It is about 3 hours from here," he said, not sure if she wanted him to talk but feeling like the silence needed breaking. "The ranch is small but growing. I have about 200 head of cattle and a dozen horses. I mostly work alone, sometimes hire help during roundup." She did not respond, of course. He had not expected her to. "I bought you because what they were doing was wrong," he continued, feeling like he owed her an explanation. "I do not hold with treating people like property. The paper says you are bound to me for 5 years, but I am not going to treat you like a slave. You will work. I need help around the place, but you will be treated fairly. You will have your own room, proper meals, and respect." Still no response, but he thought perhaps she relaxed slightly against his back. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when the ranch came into view. The house sat in a small valley with cottonwood trees along a creek. The barn was newer than the house, built large enough for future growth. Corrals spread out from the barn, currently holding about half his horse herd. Isaac helped Abigail down from the horse, noting how light she was. Too light. They had not been feeding her enough, whoever had kept her before. "That is the house," he said, pointing. "Barn over there. Chicken coop behind the house, though I only have about 6 hens. Root cellar is built into the hillside. Outhouse is past the cottonwoods." He led her inside, suddenly seeing the place through fresh eyes. It was clean but sparse. A table he had made himself stood in the kitchen area, along with a cast iron stove and simple cabinets. The main room held a sofa he had bought in town, a couple of chairs, and not much else. No decorations, no softness. A bachelor's dwelling. "That is your room," he said, opening the door to the smaller bedroom. It held a simple bed frame with a mattress, a small dresser, and a window that looked out toward the creek. "It is not much, but it is yours. I will respect your privacy." Abigail stepped into the room, her fingers trailing along the dresser. She turned to look at him, and for the first time, something like gratitude flickered across her face. "You must be hungry," Isaac said. "Let me see what I can put together for supper." He left her to settle in and went to the kitchen, feeling suddenly overwhelmed by the change his impulsive decision had brought to his life. He had lived alone since coming to Washington Territory 4 years ago, fleeing memories and mistakes in Colorado. The solitude had suited him, or so he had told himself. Isaac put coffee on to boil and started frying salt pork in a skillet. He had sourdough bread from his last baking and some beans left from yesterday. Not fancy, but filling. He was adding wood to the stove when Abigail appeared in the doorway. She had taken off her bonnet, and he noticed for the first time how young she looked. Her face was oval-shaped with delicate features, her eyes that unusual gray-blue that reminded him of storm clouds before rain. She watched him work with quiet attention. "You know how to cook?" he asked. She nodded. "Well, tomorrow you can take over the kitchen if you want. I am not much good at it." He flipped the salt pork. "Can you read and write?" Another nod, this one more emphatic. Her face brightened slightly. "That is good. That is real good." He felt relief wash through him. "We can communicate that way then. I will get you paper and a pencil." After supper, which they ate in awkward silence at the small table, Isaac dug through his limited supplies and found an old ledger with blank pages in the back. He tore out several pages and found a stubby pencil. "Here," he said, offering them to her. "You can write whatever you need to tell me." Abigail took the paper and pencil like they were precious gifts. Her fingers trembled slightly as she bent over the page. Her handwriting was careful and neat, the letters perfectly formed. She wrote for a moment, then turned the paper so he could read it. "Thank you for buying me. I will work hard. I promise I will not be a burden." Isaac felt his chest tighten. "You are not a burden, and I did not buy you to own you. I bought you to get you out of that situation. As far as I am concerned, you are free." She stared at him, disbelief clear on her face. She wrote again. "The paper says 5 years. Papers can be burned," Isaac said quietly. "I am not going to hold you to that, but I hope you will choose to stay and help me. I could use the help and you need a place to be. We can help each other." Abigail looked down at the table and he saw her swallow hard. When she looked back up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. She wrote quickly, "Where would I go? I have nowhere else." "Then stay here as long as you want," Isaac said. "You will earn wages. Not much at first, I am not a rich man, but fair pay for fair work. You will have a roof over your head and food in your belly. And I give you my word, I will never hurt you or take advantage of you." She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether she could believe him. Finally, she wrote one more line. "Why are you being kind to me?" Isaac thought about that, about how to explain something he did not fully understand himself. "Because someone should be," he said finally. "And because what they were doing in that town was wrong. People should not be bought and sold, no matter the reason." Abigail nodded slowly, then stood and gathered the dishes. She took them to the basin and began washing them without being asked. Isaac watched her work, noting the efficiency of her movements. She had done this before many times. Good kitchen skills learned somewhere. The first week was an adjustment for both of them. Isaac was used to solitude and his own routines. Having someone else in the house felt strange, like wearing new boots that had not been broken in yet. But Abigail was quiet, unobtrusive, and incredibly hardworking. She rose before dawn and had coffee ready when he came out of his room. She cooked proper meals, things he had not bothered with when cooking for himself. She cleaned the house, tended the chickens, and worked the vegetable garden he had planted but neglected. She did laundry, mended his worn shirts, and organized the chaos of his kitchen cabinets, and she never spoke. Not even an attempt. Sometimes Isaac would catch her humming, a sound without words that vibrated in her throat. The sound was oddly pleasant, melodic in a way that made him pause in whatever he was doing. They communicated through her writing and his speaking. She carried the paper and pencil with her always, ready to write whatever needed saying. Her notes were brief and to the point, asking about meals or chores or where supplies were kept. Isaac found himself talking to her more than he had talked to anyone in years. He told her about the ranch, about his plans for expanding the herd. He explained about the horses he was breaking, the cattle drives, the challenges of making a living in the territory. She listened with evident interest, her expressive eyes following his words. Sometimes in the evening, after supper, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the hills. Those were Isaac's favorite times, the quiet companionship oddly comfortable. Abigail would hum softly, those wordless melodies that seemed to capture the mood of the evening. One night, about 2 weeks after bringing her home, Isaac gathered the courage to ask what he had been wondering. "What happened to you?" he said gently. "Why did your family sell you?" Abigail looked down at her hands for a long moment. Then she picked up her paper and began writing. This time she wrote more than usual, filling the page with her neat script. "My mother died when I was 7. My father remarried when I was 10. My stepmother already had 3 children and did not want me. My father died last year. My stepfather said I was useless because I could not speak. He said no man would marry me, so I was just a burden eating their food. He decided to sell me rather than feed me any longer." Isaac read the words twice, anger building in his chest. "That is terrible. I am sorry that happened to you." She wrote again. "I used to have a good life. My mother taught me to read and write. We had a house in Portland. My father was a clerk. Everything changed when he remarried. Portland is a long way from here. Yes. After my father died, my stepfather moved us to Kennewick. He thought there would be opportunities here. There were not. Just debts and desperation. Well, you are safe now," Isaac said firmly. "Nobody is going to sell you again." Abigail looked at him with those storm cloud eyes, and for a moment something passed between them. A connection, fragile but real. She smiled, just a slight curve of her lips, but it transformed her face. She was pretty, Isaac realized with a start. More than pretty when she smiled. He looked away, suddenly uncomfortable with that observation. She was his employee under his protection. He could not be thinking of her that way. But the thought, once formed, was hard to dismiss. As summer faded toward autumn, Isaac found himself increasingly aware of Abigail's presence. The way she moved through the house with quiet grace. The way she hummed while working, creating melodies that somehow matched whatever she was doing. The way she smiled at him over morning coffee, her eyes warm with something that might have been affection. She had filled out since coming to the ranch, no longer quite so thin. Good food and less stress had put color in her cheeks and a healthy glow to her skin. She braided her hair differently now, a looser style that softened her features. Isaac caught himself watching her more often than he should. The curve of her neck when she bent over her mending. The way her dress swayed when she walked to the chicken coop. The rare sound of her almost laugh, a breathy exhalation that spoke of genuine amusement. He was in trouble and he knew it. One afternoon in late September, Isaac was working with a young mare in the corral, trying to get her used to the saddle. The horse was skittish, prone to shying at nothing. He was patient, speaking to her in a low, soothing voice while slowly introducing the saddle blanket. Abigail came out to hang laundry on the line strung between 2 posts near the house. She worked quietly, but the mare's ears swiveled toward her. When Abigail began humming one of her wordless songs, the mare's head came up with interest. Isaac paused, watching. The humming continued, a gentle melody that seemed to float on the air. The mare took a step toward the fence, then another. Her agitation faded, replaced by curiosity. "Keep doing that," Isaac said quietly. Abigail looked at him, confused, but continued humming. Isaac slowly approached the mare with the saddle blanket. The horse's attention was divided between him and the sound Abigail was making. She stood still, almost entranced as he laid the blanket across her back for the first time. "Well, I will be," Isaac said softly. "She likes your singing." Abigail stopped humming and the mare immediately became restless again. Understanding crossed Abigail's face. She started humming again. this time moving closer to the corral fence. The mare calmed once more. Over the next hour, with Abigail's humming as a constant backdrop, Isaac successfully saddled the mare for the first time. The horse accepted the saddle with far less fuss than he had anticipated, her attention on the woman making those sweet sounds. When he finally unsaddled the mare and released her into the corral, Isaac walked over to where Abigail stood by the fence. "That was remarkable," he said. "You have a gift." Abigail ducked her head, but he could see she was pleased. She pulled out her paper and wrote, "My mother said I made music before I stopped talking. She said I sang all the time as a baby, then I got sick when I was 2, brain fever. After that, I could not speak anymore. But I never forgot the melodies." "You remember songs from when you were 2 years old?" Isaac asked, amazed. She nodded and wrote more. "I remember everything. All the songs my mother sang, all the music I ever heard. It is all still inside me. I just cannot put words to it anymore." "The horses do not care about words," Isaac said. "They just hear the music." Over the following weeks, Abigail became an integral part of his horse training. She would stand by the corral and hum while he worked with the animals. The horses responded to her in ways they never had to just his voice alone. Even the most stubborn animals would calm when she sang her wordless songs. Isaac found himself inventing reasons to work with the horses when she was outside. He loved watching her face as she hummed, the way she seemed to lose herself in the music. Her eyes would close sometimes, her body swaying slightly to rhythms only she could hear. She was beautiful in those moments. More than beautiful. She was magical, otherworldly, a siren singing silent songs that tamed wild beasts. October brought the first frost and the need to move cattle to winter pasture. Isaac hired 2 men from town to help with the drive, a week-long process of moving the herd to better grazing land. He worried about leaving Abigail alone at the ranch, but she assured him through her writing that she would be fine. "I am not afraid," she wrote. "I have the dog and the rifle you taught me to shoot. I will take care of everything." He had indeed taught her to shoot over the past month, partly for protection and partly because it seemed a useful skill. She had proven to be a good shot, patient and steady. "If anyone comes around causing trouble, you shoot first and ask questions later," Isaac said seriously. "I mean it, Abigail. Your safety is more important than being polite." She nodded, and he saw determination in her eyes. The cattle drive went smoothly, but Isaac found himself distracted the entire time. He worried about Abigail constantly, imagined all the things that could go wrong. When the work was finally done and he rode back toward the ranch, he pushed Copper harder than he probably should have. He arrived at sunset to find everything in perfect order. The chickens were locked up, the horses fed, smoke coming from the chimney. Abigail was in the kitchen making supper, and the smell of fresh bread filled the house. She looked up when he came in, and her face lit with a smile that made his heart stutter in his chest. "Everything all right?" he asked, suddenly breathless. She nodded enthusiastically and gestured to the table, which was set for supper. She had made a feast by their usual standards, pot roast with vegetables and that fresh bread. "You did not have to go to all this trouble," he said. She wrote quickly, "I wanted to. I missed you." 3 simple words that turned his world upside down. She missed him. Not missed having help with chores or missed feeling safe. She missed him, specifically, personally. Isaac realized he had been fooling himself. This was not just appreciation for a good employee. This was not just protectiveness toward someone under his care. This was something deeper, more dangerous. He was falling in love with her. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Abigail had become essential to his life in just 3 months. She was the first thing he thought of when he woke and the last thing on his mind before sleep. Her presence made the house a home. Her silent songs filled spaces he had not known were empty, but was it fair to pursue such feelings? She was bound to him by that contract, even if he had said he would not hold her to it. The power imbalance troubled him. How could he be sure she wanted him for himself, and not just because she felt obligated or had nowhere else to go? Over supper, Isaac found himself watching her more openly than before. The delicate way she ate, the way her eyes crinkled when something amused her, the graceful movements of her hands as she reached for bread or water. She caught him staring and raised an eyebrow in question. "Sorry," he said, feeling heat rise in his face. "I was just thinking how much nicer it is to come home to someone than to an empty house." Her expression softened. She wrote, "It is nicer to have someone come home than to be alone too." They cleaned up after supper together, a comfortable routine they had developed. Isaac washed while Abigail dried and put things away. Their hands brushed occasionally, innocent touches that sent electricity up his arm each time. When they finished, Abigail turned to him with a serious expression. She wrote something, hesitated, then handed him the paper. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," Isaac said. She wrote more, her pencil moving slowly as if choosing words carefully. "Why did you never marry? You have a good ranch, you are a good man. Most men would have a wife by now." Isaac leaned against the counter, considering how much to tell her, but she had shared her painful past with him. He owed her honesty. "I was engaged once," he said quietly. "Back in Colorado, her name was Margaret. We were going to be married, but then I caught her with another man 3 days before the wedding. He had more money than I did, better prospects. She chose him." Abigail's face showed distress. She wrote quickly, "I am sorry. That must have hurt terribly." "It did," Isaac admitted. "I left Colorado and came here to start over. I figured I was better off alone than risking that kind of pain again." "You still love her?" "No," Isaac said without hesitation. "I realize now I probably never really loved her. I loved the idea of not being alone anymore. But I did not really know her and she did not know me." Abigail nodded slowly, then wrote more. "I used to think no one would ever want me because I cannot speak. My stepmother told me I was damaged, worthless. I believed her." "You are not damaged," Isaac said fiercely. "You are perfect exactly as you are. Any man would be lucky to have you." She looked up at him with those storm cloud eyes, and he saw hope there mixed with fear. She wrote one more line, "Any man." The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Isaac knew he was at a crossroads. He could pretend not to understand what she was asking, could maintain the safe distance of employer and employee. Or he could risk his heart again, reach for something real. He chose risk. "Especially me," he said softly. "I would be the luckiest man alive." Abigail's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. She grabbed the pencil and wrote frantically, "You want me. Even though I cannot speak. Even though I come with nothing, I want you because of who you are," Isaac said, moving closer. "Your silence does not matter to me. You communicate just fine. And you do not come with nothing. You come with kindness and strength and songs that tame wild horses. You come with a heart that I have somehow managed to fall into despite my best efforts to stay alone." She was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking. Isaac pulled her into his arms and she came willingly, burying her face against his chest. He could feel her tears soaking through his shirt, feel the way she trembled. "It is all right," he murmured, stroking her hair. "You do not have to be afraid. I will never hurt you. I swear it." She pulled back slightly and looked up at him, her face tear-streaked but radiant. She made a sound, a sort of breathy exhalation that might have been a laugh or a sob or both. Then she stood on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative, unpracticed, but filled with such emotion that it made Isaac's head spin. He returned it gently, mindful not to overwhelm her. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "We will go slow," he promised. "As slow as you need. But I want you to know, Abigail, I love you. I think I have been falling in love with you since the day I saw you on that auction block, refusing to bow your head." She grabbed her paper and pencil from the table where she had left them and wrote with shaking hands, "I love you too. I have loved you for weeks now. I was so afraid you only saw me as a servant or a charity case. I never dreamed you might care for me the way I care for you." "Then we have both been fools," Isaac said with a small laugh, "dancing around our feelings when we could have been honest." They talked late into the night, sitting close on the sofa, her hand in his. They spoke of hopes and dreams, of painful pasts and possible futures. Abigail wrote pages and pages, telling him things she had never told anyone. Isaac shared his own fears and failures, the mistakes that had driven him west. When they finally said good night and retreated to their separate rooms, Isaac lay awake for hours, his heart too full for sleep. He had not expected this, had not been looking for love. But it had found him anyway, in the form of a silent girl with storm cloud eyes and songs without words. The next morning felt different, charged with new awareness. They smiled at each other over breakfast, their eyes meeting and holding. Isaac found excuses to touch her hand, her shoulder, to brush past her in the kitchen. Each touch was a small revelation, permission finally granted to show affection. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened. Isaac courted her properly, despite the fact that they lived under the same roof. He brought her wildflowers from the hills. He took her on rides to show her the beautiful places on his ranch. He taught her to play cards in the evenings, and they competed with playful intensity. Abigail bloomed under his attention. She smiled constantly now, her whole face alight with happiness. She still communicated through writing, but her notes now included endearments and playful teasing. She signed them with elaborate hearts or little drawings. One evening in November, Isaac broached the subject that had been on his mind. "I want to marry you," he said directly. "Properly with a preacher and witnesses. I want everyone to know you are my wife, not my servant." Abigail's face showed joy and fear in equal measure. She wrote quickly, "Are you sure? What will people say? They will remember that you bought me." "I do not care what people say," Isaac replied. "Let them talk. We know the truth. We know this is real, but the contract. I am still bound to you for years." "How can it be a real marriage when I am legally obligated to stay?" Isaac went to his room and returned with the contract paper from the auction. Abigail watched as he took it to the stove and fed it to the flames. The paper curled and blackened, turning to ash. "There," he said. "You are free. You can leave right now if you want. You can go anywhere, do anything. I will give you money for travel, letters of reference, whatever you need." Abigail stared at the stove, at the place where the contract had been consumed by fire. Then she looked at Isaac with tears streaming down her face. She wrote frantically, "I do not want to go anywhere. I want to stay here with you forever. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, yes, yes." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, trying to pour all his love into that kiss. She responded with equal passion, her arms wrapping around his neck. They planned the wedding for December, wanting to give Abigail time to make a proper dress. She worked on it in the evenings, cutting and sewing fabric she had chosen from several options Isaac brought from town. The dress was simple but elegant, a cream-colored wool that would be practical for a winter wedding. Isaac told people in Kennewick that he was getting married. Some of them remembered the silent girl from the auction and gave him looks ranging from disapproval to pity. He ignored them all. A few people, like Mrs. Patterson from the general store, offered genuine congratulations. "She is a sweet girl," Mrs. Patterson said. "I am glad she found someone decent. The world can be cruel to those who are different." The preacher agreed to perform the ceremony, though he asked Isaac several pointed questions to make sure Abigail was entering the marriage willingly. Isaac brought Abigail to town to meet with him, and she wrote out her own statement confirming her desire to marry. "Most unusual situation," the preacher said, scratching his beard, "but I can see she has a clear mind and is not being coerced. Very well." December 15th. They married on a cold, bright day with snow on the ground and ice crystals in the air that caught the light like diamonds. Mrs. Patterson and her husband served as witnesses. Abigail wore her cream dress and a wreath of evergreen branches in her hair. Isaac wore his best suit, purchased specifically for the occasion. When the preacher asked if she took Isaac as her husband, Abigail nodded emphatically and held up a card she had prepared in advance. "YES" was written in large, decorated letters. "I reckon that is clear enough," the preacher said with a smile. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride." Isaac kissed her tenderly, aware of their audience but not caring. Abigail was his wife now, legally and morally. Nothing could separate them. They had a small celebration at the Pattersons' home, a few other townspeople joining for cake and coffee. Abigail charmed them with her smiles and written notes, and by the end of the afternoon, even the skeptics seemed won over. The ride back to the ranch felt different now. They were husband and wife, returning to their home together. The sky was turning pink and orange with sunset, painting the snow-covered landscape in warm tones. Inside, Isaac had prepared a surprise. He had cleaned the house thoroughly, put fresh linens on his bed, the one they would now share, and set candles around the room. He had even somehow acquired flowers, precious in winter, from Mrs. Patterson's greenhouse. "Welcome home, Mrs. Brennan," he said, helping Abigail down from the horse. She smiled that radiant smile that never failed to make his heart race. She wrote quickly, "It is a strange thing to have a new name, but I like it. Mrs. Isaac Brennan." That night they came together as husband and wife with tenderness and passion. Isaac was patient, mindful that this was new for Abigail. She communicated her feelings through touch and expression, and he learned to read her silent language of gasps and sighs and wordless sounds. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Isaac felt a completeness he had never experienced before. This was what had been missing in his engagement to Margaret. This bone-deep connection, this sense of two souls recognizing each other. Abigail traced patterns on his chest with her finger, and even in the dark, he knew she was smiling. Winter passed in a haze of contentment. They were snowed in for much of January and February, which suited them fine. It gave them time to simply be together, learning each other's rhythms and preferences. Isaac taught Abigail to play chess, and she proved to be a formidable opponent. She taught him some of the melodies she hummed, so he could whistle along while they worked. In March, the snow began to melt and they prepared for spring. Isaac hired help to expand the barn, planning for a larger horse herd. Abigail started seedlings for an ambitious vegetable garden, far larger than the small patch Isaac had managed alone. One evening in early April, Abigail handed Isaac a note with a strange expression on her face. Nervousness mixed with excitement. "I think I am with child. My courses have not come in 2 months." Joy exploded through Isaac like fireworks. A child. They were going to have a child. He pulled Abigail into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed that breathy, almost laugh of hers. "We are going to be parents," he said, setting her down gently, suddenly worried about being too rough. "Are you happy about it?" She nodded vigorously and wrote, "So happy I could burst. I always wanted children but thought I never would. What man would want a mute wife to mother his children?" "This man," Isaac said firmly. "You are going to be a wonderful mother." Over the following months, Isaac watched Abigail's body change with wonder. Her belly swelled with their growing child. She glowed with health and happiness, more beautiful than ever. He could not keep his hands off her, constantly touching her stomach, feeling for kicks. The baby was active, especially when Abigail hummed. The movements would increase, as if the child was dancing to her silent songs. Isaac loved to watch her face during those moments, the soft wonder as she felt their child respond to her voice. They prepared the second bedroom as a nursery, Isaac building a cradle with his own hands. Abigail sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her face dreamy as she worked. They discussed names endlessly, writing lists and debating merits. In late November, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Abigail went into labor. Isaac rode to town and brought back Mrs. Patterson, who had experience with births. The labor was long and difficult, and Isaac spent hours pacing and praying while Abigail labored in their bedroom. When he finally heard the thin wail of a newborn, he nearly collapsed with relief. Mrs. Patterson emerged with a tired smile. "You have a son," she announced. "Both mother and baby are healthy. You can go in now." Isaac entered the room to find Abigail propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. His son. Their son. "He is perfect," Isaac whispered, touching the baby's impossibly small hand. The infant's fingers curled around his, gripping with surprising strength. Abigail looked up at him with tears of joy on her face. She could not write with her hands full, but her expression said everything. They had created this miracle together, this new life. They named him Samuel, after Isaac's father. Samuel Brennan had his mother's storm cloud eyes and his father's dark hair. He was a healthy baby with strong lungs that he exercised frequently. Isaac discovered something wonderful in those early weeks. When Samuel cried, nothing soothed him as quickly as Abigail's humming. She would hold him close and hum her wordless melodies, and the baby would quiet, his eyes fixed on her face as if memorizing the sound. "He knows his mother's voice," Isaac said, watching them. "He heard you singing to him all those months." Abigail smiled, tears on her cheeks, and Isaac knew she was thinking the same thing he was. She could not give their son words, but she could give him music. She could give him love in a language that transcended speech. Samuel grew quickly, a happy baby who smiled early and often. As the months passed, Isaac watched his wife blossom as a mother. She was patient and attentive, anticipating the baby's needs with uncanny accuracy. She hummed to him constantly, and Samuel would kick his legs and wave his arms, clearly delighted. When Samuel began babbling at 6 months, making those first experimental sounds, Isaac saw fear flash across Abigail's face. She wrote a note when the baby was napping. "What if he asks why his mother does not talk? What if he is ashamed of me?" "He will never be ashamed of you," Isaac said firmly. "We will explain when he is old enough to understand. We will teach him that people communicate in different ways and that is all right. He will grow up knowing his mother's love and that is what matters. But what if he inherits my condition? What if he cannot speak either?" "Then we will love him just the same," Isaac replied, "and he will still have had the blessing of hearing your songs just as I have." As it turned out, Samuel had no trouble speaking. His first word was "da," spoken at 10 months while reaching for Isaac. His second word was harder to decipher, a sound that might have been "ma" or might have been an attempt at the humming sound Abigail made. By the time Samuel was 2, he was a chatterbox, talking constantly in the way toddlers do. He narrated his play, asked endless questions, and sang the melodies he had learned from his mother, adding his own words to her wordless tunes. Abigail wrote one evening, "He talks enough for both of us." Isaac laughed. "He certainly does. I think he got my tendency to fill silence with words and your musical ability, quite a combination." They had more children over the years. A daughter named Rose came 2 years after Samuel, and another son, Thomas, 2 years after that. Each pregnancy brought the same joy and wonder as the first. The house filled with noise and laughter, with the sounds of children playing and learning. All 3 children inherited their mother's musical gifts. They sang constantly, complex harmonies that seemed beyond their years. Abigail would hum the melody and the children would add words, creating songs together. It was their own language, unique to their family. The ranch prospered. Isaac's reputation as a horse trainer grew, especially after word spread about his wife's uncanny ability to calm even the most difficult animals. People came from miles away to have their horses trained by the Brennans, to witness Abigail's silent songs that gentled wild spirits. Samuel grew into a serious boy who helped his father with the horses. Rose was bold and fearless, more interested in riding than household tasks. Thomas was the dreamer, content to sit and listen to his mother's humming for hours. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac and Abigail sat on the porch after putting the children to bed, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The years had been kind to them both. A few gray hairs, some lines around the eyes, but mostly just the comfortable ease of 2 people who had built a life together. "You remember the day I bought you?" Isaac asked. Abigail nodded and pulled out the paper and pencil she still carried everywhere. Even after all these years, this was how they communicated when words were needed. "How could I forget? You saved my life that day, not just from being sold, but from believing I was worthless." "You were never worthless," Isaac said. "I hope you know that now." She smiled and wrote more. "I know it. You and our children have shown me every day that I have value, that my silence does not diminish my worth. I am so grateful for you, for this life we have built." "I am the grateful one," Isaac said, taking her hand. "You have given me everything. A home, a family, a reason to wake up happy every morning. Your silence never held you back. It held songs, Abigail, the sweetest songs I have ever heard." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and from inside the house, they could hear Rose singing a lullaby to her doll, the words set to one of Abigail's melodies. The sound drifted through the open window, sweet and pure. "That is our legacy," Isaac said softly. "Those songs you pass to our children, they will pass them to their children and on and on. Your voice will echo through generations." Abigail squeezed his hand and he felt the wetness of tears on his shirt, but they were good tears, he knew. Happy tears. Years continued to pass in the gentle rhythm of ranch life. The children grew. Samuel married at 22, a kind girl from town who loved that he sang while he worked. They had a daughter the following year, and Abigail cried with joy at becoming a grandmother. Rose proved to be as good with horses as her mother, with the same gift for calming them with song. She married one of the hands who worked for Isaac, a quiet man who appreciated her fierce spirit. Thomas became a teacher, using his love of music and learning to educate children in Kennewick. He married a fellow teacher, and they filled their home with books and song. Isaac and Abigail grew old together, their hair turning silver, their movements slower but still in sync. They were never apart for long, drawn to each other by bonds forged over decades. Their love had deepened with time, becoming something solid and unshakable. One evening, when they were both in their 60s, sitting on that same porch where they had spent countless sunsets. Abigail wrote something and handed it to Isaac. "I have been thinking about that day in Kennewick." The auction. Everyone thought I was being sold because I was damaged goods, but really, I was being delivered to where I needed to be, to you. "I have often thought the same thing," Isaac admitted. "If I had come to town an hour later, or if I had not had the money, or if I had been too cowardly to bid, we would never have found each other." "You believe in fate." "I did not used to," Isaac said. "But yes, I think I do now. I think we were meant to find each other. Two broken people who fit together perfectly." "I was never broken. You taught me that, just different." "You are right," Isaac said. "Different, special. Mine." Abigail smiled and began to hum one of the first melodies she had sung for him all those years ago. Isaac closed his eyes and listened, letting the wordless song wash over him. After all this time, it still had the power to move him, to fill him with peace and contentment. From down the hill, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their high voices calling to each other in the twilight. Samuel's daughter was teaching Rose's twin sons a new song, the melody unmistakably one of Abigail's. "Your songs have spread far," Isaac said. "The whole territory probably knows them by now, passed from person to person." Abigail wrote, "Music is meant to be shared." "I am glad my songs have found so many hearts, but the one that matters most is yours." "You have had my heart since the beginning," Isaac said. "You always will." They sat together as the stars came out, as they had done thousands of times before. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the kind of understanding that comes from a lifetime of love. Abigail hummed softly, and Isaac held her hand, and everything was exactly as it should be. When Isaac passed away in his sleep at 73, Abigail grieved deeply but not bitterly. They had been given 42 years together, more than many couples could hope for. She had loved him and been loved in return, fully and completely. That was a blessing, not a tragedy. She moved in with Samuel and his family, spending her days helping with the grandchildren and tending the garden. She still hummed constantly, teaching the younger generation her songs. The melodies lived on, passed from her to children, to grandchildren, to great-grandchildren. Abigail lived to be 81, her mind sharp until the end, even as her body grew frail. In her final days, surrounded by 3 generations of family, she hummed one last song. It was a new melody, one they had never heard before, and it was indescribably beautiful. Samuel sat by her bedside, holding her hand as Isaac once had. "Where are you going, Mama?" he asked gently, tears on his face. Abigail smiled and pointed upward. Then she pointed to her heart and to his. The message was clear. She was going to be with Isaac, but she would remain in the hearts of those she loved. She closed her eyes while humming that final song, and she slipped away as peacefully as anyone could hope. The family said she looked happy, a slight smile on her face, as if she could see something wonderful waiting for her. At her funeral, the church in Kennewick was packed, not just with family, but with people from all over the territory who had known Abigail or heard her songs. One by one, people stood and spoke of the silent woman who had communicated more with her humming than most people did with a lifetime of words. "She taught us that you do not need to speak to have a voice," the preacher said. Her songs spoke of love and hope and the beauty of simple things. She will be remembered not for what she could not do, but for what she could. And what she could do was fill the world with music. Samuel stood and sang one of his mother's songs, the one she had hummed most often. His voice cracked with emotion, but he made it through. His siblings joined him for the second verse, their voices blending in harmony. Then their children joined in, and their children's children, until the whole church was singing together. The song had no words, just the melody Abigail had created, but everyone understood what it meant. It meant love. It meant family. It meant that even those who cannot speak can leave a legacy that echoes through time. They buried Abigail next to Isaac on a hill overlooking the ranch. The land had been subdivided among the children by then, but they had all agreed to preserve that hill as a family cemetery. The graves were simple, marked with stone that would last for generations. Years later, when Samuel was an old man himself, he brought his great-grandson to visit the graves. The boy was 4 years old and had recently been diagnosed as deaf. Samuel's granddaughter was terrified about what this would mean for her son, how he would navigate a world he could not fully hear. Samuel knelt by his mother's grave and told the boy the story of Abigail Ellis, who became Abigail Brennan. He told him about the auction in Kennewick, about the cowboy who saw value where others saw only deficit. He told him about the wordless songs that tamed horses and filled a home with joy. "Your great-great-grandmother could not speak," Samuel said, making sure the boy could see his lips. "But she was not less than anyone else. She was more in many ways. She taught all of us that there are many ways to communicate, many ways to share love. You cannot hear like others do, but that does not mean you cannot sing your own songs." The boy looked at the gravestone, at the simple inscription, "Abigail Brennan, beloved wife, mother, and friend. Her songs live on." "Will I be okay?" the boy asked, his words slightly slurred but understandable. "You will be more than okay," Samuel promised. "You come from a long line of people who found ways to be heard. Your great-great-grandfather saw past limitations to the person beneath. That is what we do in this family. We see each other truly." The boy nodded, comforted, and Samuel felt the presence of his parents strongly in that moment. They were gone, but not forgotten. Their love story had become family legend, told and retold, shaping how each generation understood the meaning of acceptance and love. The ranch continued through the generations, pieces of it staying in family hands. The house where Isaac and Abigail had built their life together was preserved, turned into a small museum of sorts for family gatherings. The porch where they had watched countless sunsets still stood, the wood worn smooth by time and weather. On summer evenings, family members would gather there, sitting in chairs or on the steps, and someone would start humming one of Abigail's songs. Others would join in, the melodies passed down through the decades. Young and old, dozens of voices creating harmony, remembering the woman who had proved that silence could hold the sweetest songs. In Kennewick, a historical marker was eventually placed near where the auction block had once stood. It told the story of Abigail Ellis and Isaac Brennan, two people who had found love in unexpected circumstances. It spoke of injustice overcome, of seeing past disability to the person beneath, of the power of music to transcend words. Tourists sometimes visited, taking pictures and asking questions. Locals would point up toward the hills and say, "The ranch is still there, still in the family." Sometimes on quiet evenings, people swear they can hear someone humming, even when no one is around. They say it is Abigail, still singing her silent songs. Whether that was true or just romantic fancy, no one could say. But it was certain that Abigail's legacy lived on, not just in the descendants who carried her blood, but in the lessons her life had taught. That worth is not measured by what you can do, but by who you are. That love sees past limitations. That sometimes the most profound communication requires no words at all. The story of the girl who could not speak and the cowboy who heard her silent songs became part of the folklore of Washington Territory. It was told in different ways by different people, some details embellished, others forgotten, but the heart of it remained true. Two people had found each other against all odds. They had built a life together based on respect, understanding, and a love that transcended conventional communication. Their children's children's children still lived in the area, scattered across Washington state. Some had stayed on the land, continuing the ranching tradition. Others had moved to cities, pursuing different lives. But they all knew the story of their ancestors. They all carried within them the songs Abigail had created, melodies that had been passed down and adapted but never forgotten. At family reunions, the oldest members would tell the story to the youngest, making sure each generation understood where they came from. They would point out family resemblances. "You have Abigail's eyes," or "You hum just like she used to, even when you don't realize you are doing it." The story was a reminder that the family had been built on a foundation of accepting differences, of seeing value in every person regardless of their limitations. It set a standard for how family members treated each other and how they moved through the world. One of Abigail's great-great-great-granddaughters became a speech therapist, working with children who had various communication disorders. She kept a picture of Abigail on her desk, a faded photograph from the 1890s showing a woman with storm cloud eyes and a gentle smile. When frustrated children asked if they would ever be normal, she would point to that picture and tell them about their ancestor. "Normal is overrated," she would say. "My great-great-great-grandmother never spoke a word in her life." She still managed to communicate love, to raise children, to help run a successful ranch, and to touch hundreds of lives with her songs. You will find your own way to communicate, your own way to be heard. The right people will listen. Another descendant became a veterinarian specializing in horses, having inherited not just Abigail's love of the animals, but also her gift for calming them. He hummed while he worked, old melodies passed down through the generations, and owners marveled at how their skittish horses would settle under his care. "It is an old family trick," he would say with a smile, never explaining further. The ranch house, carefully maintained, held artifacts from Isaac and Abigail's life. The dress she wore on their wedding day, preserved in a cedar chest. The pages upon pages of her writing, notes to Isaac that documented their daily lives and deeper thoughts. The cradle Isaac had built for Samuel, which had rocked 5 generations of babies. His work tools, her sewing kit, their everyday items that told the story of an ordinary life made extraordinary by love. A guest book sat on a table in the house, and family members would write their thoughts when they visited. The entries spanned decades, each generation adding their reflections. "Thank you for showing us what love looks like," one entry read. "Your courage inspires me to face my own challenges," said another. "I brought my daughter here to meet her history. We hummed your songs together. They are still beautiful." The land itself seemed to hold memories. The creek where Isaac and Abigail had walked on summer evenings. The barn where she had hummed to the horses. The hill where they were buried, overlooking the valley they had loved. These places became sacred to the family, touchstones connecting them to their past. Time moved on, as it always does. The world changed in ways Isaac and Abigail could never have imagined. Technology advanced. Laws changed. Society evolved. But the fundamental truth of their story remained relevant. Love transcends barriers. Worth is inherent, and the human spirit finds ways to soar even when clipped by circumstance. In the town of Kennewick, now a small city with paved roads and modern amenities, older residents still remembered hearing stories from their grandparents about the silent woman and her cowboy. The Historical Society maintained records of their life, marriage certificate and land deeds and birth records of their children. These documents told the facts, but the story behind them, the love and struggle and triumph, that lived in the oral tradition passed from generation to generation. A local author eventually wrote a book about Isaac and Abigail, based on family records and historical research. It became a regional bestseller, introducing their story to people who had no connection to the family. Readers wrote letters expressing how the story had touched them, how it had changed their perspective on disability, on arranged marriages, on the meaning of communication. "I have been learning sign language to communicate with my deaf son," one letter read. "Your book reminded me that silence is not absence. My son has so much to say. I just needed to learn his language." Through it all, the songs remained. Abigail's melodies, hummed by descendants who had never met her but felt connected to her nonetheless. The wordless tunes had taken on lives of their own, adapted and changed by each generation while retaining their essential character. They were sung at weddings and funerals, during family gatherings and quiet moments alone. The songs were Abigail's voice, echoing through time. They carried her love, her strength, her refusal to be diminished by her inability to speak. They were her gift to the future, a reminder that everyone has something valuable to contribute, a unique song to sing. On the hill where Isaac and Abigail were buried, wildflowers grew in abundance. Family members had planted them over the years, creating a riot of color in spring and summer. Butterflies danced among the blooms, and birds sang in the trees that provided shade. It was a place of peace and beauty, a fitting memorial to two people who had found beauty in unexpected places. The stone markers were weathered now, the inscriptions worn but still legible. Isaac Brennan, loving husband and father. Abigail Brennan, beloved wife, mother, and friend. Her songs live on, and they did, in the voices of her descendants, in the memories of those who had known her, in the legacy of love and acceptance she had created, in the story that would be told as long as the family endured. The sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in those same shades of pink and gold that Isaac and Abigail had watched together for decades. The land they had worked spread out below, changed but recognizable. The house still stood, solid and welcoming. The barn had been rebuilt twice but occupied the same spot. The creek still ran through the property, its gentle sound a constant through all the changes. If you listened carefully on quiet evenings, some said you could hear humming on the breeze, a wordless melody, sweet and haunting, carrying across the hills. It was probably just the wind or birds or imagination. But maybe, just maybe, it was something more. A reminder that love does not die. That songs once created echo forever. That the things we think make us weak can become our greatest strengths. Isaac and Abigail's story was one of many love stories, but it was unique in its details. A girl who could not speak, sold because she was seen as worthless. A cowboy who looked past her silence and heard the songs her heart was singing. Two broken pieces that fit together perfectly, creating something whole and beautiful. They had lived, loved, raised children, built a life, and left a legacy that touched generations. They had proved that communication comes in many forms, that love requires listening with more than just ears, that the sweetest songs are sometimes the ones without words. Their story ended where it began, in the territory they had claimed as home. But endings are just another kind of beginning. The story lived on in those who remembered, in those who carried their blood, in those who learned from their example. It lived on in songs passed from parent to child, in values instilled and lessons taught, in the way family members saw and valued each other. Most of all, it lived on in the simple truth at its heart. Love transforms everything. It takes what the world calls broken and makes it whole. It sees past limitations to the eternal worth of the soul. It creates songs from silence and hope from despair. That was the legacy of Abigail and Isaac Brennan. Not wealth or fame, but love. Pure, enduring, transformative love. The kind of love that builds families and shapes futures. The kind of love that echoes through generations, getting stronger rather than weaker with the passage of time. And so, as the sun set over the ranch in Kennewick, Washington, as it had set countless times before and would set countless times again, their story continued. Not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in the quiet continuation of the life they had built. In children raised with love. In songs still sung. In a family that knew its history and honored its roots. The girl they had sold because she could not speak had found her voice after all. Not in words, but in music. Not in speaking, but in living a life of love and purpose. The cowboy who had bought her freedom had received far more than he gave. Together, they had created something that would outlast them both. A legacy of love that proved silence could hold the sweetest songs of all.